Well, may I get you to read just one other paragraph while you're speaking about the closing of this book? This is your view of the human race. The last paragraph right there.
As for the human case, the generation of men come and go and are in eternity no more than bacteria upon a luminous slide, and the fall of a republic or the rise of an empire, so significant to those involved, is not detectable upon the slide, even were there an interested eye to behold that steadily proliferating species which would either end in time or, with luck, become something else, since change is the nature of life and its hope.
And what do you mean with those observations?
Metamorphosis, change, transformation. Before I get to that point, I've already got Aaron Burr coming back, and some of the characters are coming back. It's now the year 2000, and we're in Ravello doing a TV program. And the young director, who is Aaron Burr, come back. He's a descendant of Burr. And I asked him, what are you going to do this time, since I'm not the writer anymore? Oh, he said, I'm not going to bother with politics, but it'll be something different, more vast. I said, oh, you mean the internet? No, he said, larger than that. I think the next thing is a restructuring of the human race physically, that this is now a possibility, that we, with genetic experiments, we can evolve a new kind of human being. Now, of course, we can evolve a monster or an angel or a cross between the two. But I think if there's a human race in 1,000 years, we won't look anything like we do now. I'm not saying that in the book because I'm not going to end with anything technical or pseudo-technical. But if we are to survive, otherwise we will die. I mean, the planet is clearly dying. We're running out of water. The air is polluted. There are too many of us, and we've used up too much of the planet. So either we escape to another planet, which we will. That's why I use the image of bacteria. We're like bacteria. And the planet is our host, and we're eating it up because there are too many of us. So either we die out, or we transform ourselves. That's my message to the troops.
Next, for Gore Vidal's Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Mr. Vidal, first I want to say that throughout my life I've learned history and social critique through the works that you have done. And I think I have read more books by you than any other person on the planet ever at any time. Second, I want to say something about an experience I had 25 years ago when I tried to meet you psychically, and I ended up in the Beverly Hills Hotel, and maybe you'll recall that moment, and my friends were there, and I told you this experience, and you were most gracious to me. And for that, I'm very appreciative. I think the confidence that I took in mind and thinking about that I could do something to affect the life of myself, others, the planet, and being an activist actually derived from that moment of meeting you. And I'm 50 today. Now, my question 25 years later, or from that time, is that in your books it seems to me that you actually transcend time and space. Do you feel that there's another energy that motivates you as well as the research? Thank you for contributing so much to my life and the life of the people on this planet.
Thank you. That's the second caller who has attempted to make psychic connections with you. Does this happen to you a lot?
You're making one now. I don't know about this other force. We're certainly all interconnected. We all go back to the Big Bang. We're all units of energy that, when we go cold and dead, entropy as they call it, then the elements that make us up will be rearranged in new kinds of energy, new kinds of force. So in that sense, we are agreeably immortal, though the consciousness that is Jane and the consciousness that is Jack is not going to continue. But the material, the matter that makes us up, does go into new arrangements. And at the end of the Golden Age, I'm, through the return of Aaron Burr, trying to show that something can be in the works, and it's probably going on. We can say it's psychic, we can say it's part of our common heritage of that initial bang that started creation. What it is, where it is, we still don't know. It's a pity. It's like being handed a mystery story, and you get interested in it, and halfway through they take it away from you. And, you don't need to know the end.
Next call is from Vicksburg, Mississippi. Welcome.
Hello, Susan. Hello, Mr. Vidal.
How are you?
I have a two-part question. In your wonderful play, I guess from 1960, The Best Man, was Senator Joe Cantwell, was he based upon Senator McCarthy? And secondly, did you have any say in the casting of the film in the leads played by Henry Fonda and Cliff Robertson?
Yes, I worked with the producers on the casting, and Fonda was marvelous, and Cliff Robertson was the best he's ever been as Cantwell. Cantwell was not based on Joe McCarthy, but I mean, none of them are based on anybody. They're suggested by certain political types, and there's a Nixonian ruthless type, which is much closer, I suppose, to Senator Cantwell. But the interesting thing about the play and how it works, when it works, is the supposedly good guy has a lot of things wrong with him, and the supposedly bad guy has a lot of good things going. Chris Noth is wonderful as Senator Cantwell, and half the audience thinks that he probably should be president, despite his ruthless, amoral ways. And Spalding Gray, who plays the elegant Stevensonian style candidate, has a lot of things wrong with him that you might not want in a president. So the audience is, I don't tell anybody what to think about characters. I obviously have opinions, but I give the evidence. I give the characters autonomy. They say, they take over, they say and do what they must do, unless they're historical, in which case I stay with the agreed upon facts. So I think it's first of all, it'd be boring if you knew what you thought about your characters before you wrote them. And it would be very dull if you had a message to deliver. You just let it evolve, and then as you go over it, you begin to see what it is you've done. Generally, I find one writes to find out what one thinks. And I find if I don't write, I don't think. I sensate. That's about all.
Portland, Oregon. You're next. Good afternoon.
Yes, it is indeed an honor to ask you a question, Mr. Vidal. Actually, I have two questions. First, you talked about the deck of cards being very small, and I'd like to know more about the relationships or the among the presidents. I know Franklin Roosevelt was supposedly related to 11 presidents. Number two, had Ben Franklin and the others in Paris failed to get French help, what would have been the result, and how long would it have taken us to throw off British rule? Thank you so much.
Well, that's a good question. Without the French, I don't think we could have done it. You know, Washington, for all of his really great character and staying power, was not a very skillful general. Thank God neither was Cornwallis, so we didn't have two Bonapartes fighting each other here. But had the French fleet not come in at the end and decided the whole thing, we might have lost the revolution, and we might have gone on for a time as a possession of England. But as even the stupidest British government realized, you cannot have a colony 3,000 miles away whose population soon will be larger than yours. I mean, it would have fallen apart. In other words, we would have had a republic later on rather than immediately. We might have had a monarchy. There were a lot of monarchists, and there was serious discussion. Had George Washington's name been not George, he might have, had he been William, he might have become king. I think he was tempted. But we were getting rid of George III for George I. I mean, that would send shivers down proto-populist spines. But it was all important, the French aid, and we got it, and that was that. Small deck of cards, particularly at the beginning, particularly people who've been here a long time, whether English from the British Isles or Dutch like Roosevelt. Yes, through intermarrying, a web of marriages, you do get related to everybody. My relations are more on the redneck side, and Franklin Roosevelt's were more on the Eastern aristocracy, which intermarried all along. So all the great Dutch families, Beekman and so on. Roosevelt was far more proud of being related to the Beekman family, which were last distinguished in the 17th century in the state of New York, than he was of being fifth cousin to Theodore Roosevelt. That's how minds work.
Earlier, you mentioned the number of years that you were shut out from the New York Times. Today, as you and I are talking in this town, pick up the papers read by many. Both the New York Times and Washington Post have reviewed your new book. Do you tend to read reviews?
Well, I read this one because I'm going to take some action against the Times. I don't quite know what, but they're in for a bit of punishment. They gave the book, The Golden Age, to a British journalist who is Catholic, has no subjects that I can tell other than the glories of being and sufferings of being gay. And Marty Peretz of the New Republic brought him over, to everyone's surprise, to edit the New Republic. I guess that didn't pan out. Now he's a freelance journalist. The Times wanted an all-out attack on the Golden Age, so they give it to somebody who knows no American history. And he makes so many mistakes. I forget what he says about me. The mistakes that he makes, no editor who knows anything would allow in their paper. He writes it is silly when Gore Vidal says that the Japanese wanted to surrender before the atomic bomb at Hiroshima. Everybody knows they wanted. In May of 45, the bomb was August of 45. Everyone who knows anything about that war, he knows nothing, knows the Japanese were trying to surrender. They were defeated. And the only sticking point was that Roosevelt had said unconditional surrender, as Lincoln had said in the Civil War. And they had a condition, which was they could retain the emperor. And they were still arguing about that. Roosevelt is now dead. Harry Truman goes to Potsdam. He goes back. He wants to go back on all the agreements made at Yalta by Roosevelt. In the middle of his meetings with Stalin, Stalin has promised to come into the war against Japan. Suddenly, in the middle of the meetings, he gets a message that a bomb has gone off near Los Alamos in the desert, and the atom bomb works. He now knows that the war in Japan will be over any time he drops it. Meanwhile, the Japanese are trying to surrender, and we're dragging our feet, and he wants to drop the bomb to frighten Stalin. That was the whole point to the bomb. Japan there was no Tokyo. The B-29s had eliminated the city. So this was a very brutal act of diplomacy, I guess there's a polite word for it, to scare Stalin and to say, look, we're the masters of the world now. We have this extraordinary weapon, and you don't, and it'll take you years because you're too primitive. Anyway, this joker, who should not be allowed to write about these things, or if he is, he certainly should be heavily edited and corrected, doesn't know this. He knows nothing, indeed, about the subject of the book, which is Roosevelt administration and Harry Truman and Dean Acheson. I have a marvelous aria by Herbert Hoover. Well, I don't make up a Herbert Hoover aria or a Roosevelt aria. I take it from what they've actually written or said. And it's quite a passage. If you've got it, he's got it in his review. And I've come to quite admire Hoover in some ways. But Hoover was a very perceptive man. And now he acts as though, this reviewer, as though I have made up this speech for Hoover, when Hoover himself wrote it. I am certain that the next war will transform us absolutely. And he means World War II. I see more power to the great corporations, more power to the government, less power to the people. That's what I fear. Because once this starts, it is irreversible. You can't extend the mastery of the government over the daily life of a people without making government the master of those people's souls and thoughts, the way the fascists and the Bolsheviks have done. In his serpentine way, Franklin is going in the very same direction that they have gone in, and I think he knows exactly what he's doing. Now, mind you, Herbert Hoover was a bitter man who had been defeated badly by Roosevelt in the 1932 election. He was also very, very conservative, which I thought it was nice to give the conservative point of view, since I'm thought to be liberal. And so now you have a quotation from Herbert Hoover, and he thinks that I make up everything. And he's trying to use the authority of the New York Times to say, oh, don't believe anything he says. Hoover never said that. That's Vidal talking. Well, this is saying that what I do is totally a fraud. And that's actionable.